Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today we have a very interesting guest, and his name is Rick Lertzman. And Rick wrote the definitive biography of the iconic actor and Hollywood legend Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was born in 1920, and he lived to 2014. And his extravagant, sometimes tawdry life, drawing on never-before-seen excerpts from Rooney's diary and exclusive interviews with Mickey and those who knew him best, including his heretofore unknown mistress of 60 years. That's the author, Rick Lertzman's story. He wrote the definitive book on Mickey Rooney. So, I want to welcome to my show, Rick Lertzman.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's my pleasure. You know, Mickey Rooney must have been a very, very interesting person, and I want you to tell our audience all about your experience writing the book about Mickey. What was he like?
You know, it was such a great experience because I got to explore the history of actually all show business and through Mickey's eyes. So we start in 1920, and Mickey goes on stage in 1922, and he's a burlesque performer with his parents. He starts in films in 1926. He starts in a movie series called Mickey Maguire, which starts in silent films, and becomes a star as Mickey Maguire. And then he goes into films for MGM and Universal starting in 1934. And so you see the whole picture, the whole movie industry, the radio industry, TV, through Mickey's eyes, and the people he met and the experiences he had over the years. And he was an extraordinary actor. I mean, I see comments from Cary Grant and Laurence Olivier and Anthony Quinn and even Lucille Ball, who called him the world's greatest actor, the world's greatest performer. And so we took a look at his life, and his life was much different than his film career. As a professional, he was successful. He had ups and downs, but he really survived over 90 years. But his life was kind of rough. It was kind of sad. 8 marriages, and he had 8 children, and it just was an interesting book to research, and the research was fascinating because I got to talk to a lot of great actors and stars and people who had known Mickey Rooney.
Well, tell our audience about some of the people whom you did meet apropos of the fact that you were trying to find out about Mickey's life.
Well, we talked to a lot of his family, which were interesting because there's a kind of a war going on now over Mickey's will. So we got to talk to a lot of his family and experience that. His wife of almost 40 years, Jan Rooney, was very cooperative with us. His daughters are wonderful, and he has a son who's very, very ill who told us about his life. And then we met people like Ben Stiller and Sean Levy, who directed the Night at the Museum films, which the last one came out last year. We got to talk to great directors, Dick Van Dyke. We talked to so many actors and friends that he had known over the years, and it was just great talking with them and hearing what they had to say. We heard from Carl Reiner, who directed him in a film called The Comic, and we met a lot of actors that many people never heard of, like Sidney Miller, who was his friend for almost 70 years, so it was quite an interesting experience just doing the research for the book.
Yes, and Rick, you mentioned that Mickey had a very kind of depressing life, and I know that he lost all his money at some point. What was that all about?
Well, you know, Mickey was the number one highest grossing star in 1939, 40, and 41. He earned MGM hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars, not only as Andy Hardy, but with Judy Garland in those films. And while his salary was not huge, by today's standards, he was earning $2,000 a week in 1940, and an actor like that who was doing movies with Judy Garland and Andy Hardy, can you imagine somebody today like a Brad Pitt, how much money he'd be earning?
Yes. So
he earned a lot of money. By 1960, because of his many divorces and children, he went bankrupt in 1962, and then he went bankrupt again in 1998.
Oh.
Even though he appeared in Sugar Babies in the 70s and 80s, and he was earning $70,000 a week in the 1980s doing Sugar Babies, and he still ended up, at the time of his death, he only had $18,000, could not afford a funeral. A friend of mine named Roger Neal, who's a great publicist, helped pay for his funeral, and they got him buried in Hollywood forever. But it's sad seeing a man he had to keep working even in his 90s just to stay alive and to be able to put food on his table.
Yeah, and he was married to some major stars like Lana Turner and Joan Crawford. What happened with that? I know that he adored Lana Turner in particular. Why? What happened? 8 wives?
Yeah, he was married to Ava Gardner.
Oh.
And Ava Gardner was his first wife.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a different kind of lifestyle. He really was not really meant to be married because he liked the freedom of being, there's so many women throw themselves at you when you're that kind of star. So he really gambled quite a bit. He suffered his whole life from bipolarism. So he took lithium at times. So he had a kind of manic personality, and it just was very tough. But he had really beautiful wives. He was married to Martha Vickers, was his third wife. And she was a film star, a well-known film star. He married Elaine Devery, who was a gorgeous film star. It was his fourth wife. Barbara Ann Thompson was his fifth wife, with whom he had 4 kids. And she was a kind of a B movie star. And then she started an affair with one of Mickey's proteges named Milos Milosevic. And in 1966, while Mickey was still married to her and her children were in their house, Milosevic killed Mickey's wife, Barbara Ann, and committed suicide.
Wow.
So he had that horrible, his kids were in the house, and that's something he had to face. He had a kind of a nervous breakdown at the time. So, there's a lot of mysteries in Mickey's life, a lot of experiences that, he was one of the first people to discover Marilyn Monroe. It's just such an interesting life that lasted such a long period of time, over 2 centuries.
Wow, that's amazing. And particularly the fact that he gave Marilyn Monroe her start. Is that the truth? Yeah,
Mickey sometimes would tell tall tales. When I would go out to see him, he would, which he didn't have to, because he was in the films from the 1920s on. So Mickey didn't have to create it, but I think he entertained himself by doing that. So he had told, besides ourselves, he had told Larry King and many people that he named Marilyn Monroe, which is not true. He didn't name her. But, in fact, he did know her at the beginning when she was Norma Jean Baker. And his agent, his name was Johnny Hyde, was also Marilyn's boyfriend and agent. And so she was first an extra in a lot of Mickey's films, and then she actually appeared in a couple of his films. And they had known each other since, I think, 1948, and he knew her right until her death. He remained friends with her. And a great story is that Mickey made a film with Joe DiMaggio, I think it was 1999, right before Joe passed away, and Joe and Mickey had this great long talk about Marilyn Monroe, and the director of the film told us that great story, and it's just interesting hearing both of them reminisce about Marilyn.
I just wonder, of course, our generation knows Mickey Rooney. I mean, he's an icon to people like us. But what about the young people? Do they have any interest in Mickey Rooney, and do they know anything about him?
Well, Mickey still appeared in a lot of films and television shows throughout the last generation. And my own son, a lot of the classic stars, he doesn't know who Bob Hope is. And so he recognizes Mickey Rooney because of The Simpsons and The Family Guy. So he watched Mickey appeared on both series in animation form. Of course, he remembers him from Night at the Museum. I mean, last year, in 2014, Mickey did the last of the Night at the Museum films with Ben Stiller and Dick Van Dyke and Robin Williams. And Mickey appeared in films. He did his last film 2 weeks before he passed away. And that film is being released coming in October. It's called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that Mickey's film career will last 90 years. So a lot of the current generation remember him from his smaller roles in recent years, in television appearances.
Yeah, and you also mentioned Lucille Ball. Somehow or another, her name everybody seems to know, even the young people, because they do so many reruns of her shows on television, and everybody knows Desi Arnaz. I mean, you're talking about two of the icons also in the industry. And so if you had a chance to tell young people about Mickey, what would you tell them really very specifically that they would find very interesting?
Well, Mickey was an adventurer of all sorts. He was a war hero. So I always would tell kids about Mickey's war experiences. He was a decorated soldier in World War II. He was in Patton's 7th Army. And kids love to watch great films. Sometimes, you love to tell the young generation of all these great films they made. And certainly, I try to show my own kids films like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. And Mickey Rooney was, of course, in a series called The Hardy Family. He played Andy Hardy. And that was really the genesis and the first situation comedy of a father and a mother and a family. And, that was passed on from every generation, from Leave It to Beaver all the way through this generation of Modern Family. It's really kind of based on the Hardy family. So Mickey was kind of the first person to do a situation comedy. And talking about Lucy, I had a chance to take a class from Lucille Ball back in the 1970s. And she credits Mickey with helping her learn her comic technique. She said she learned from Buster Keaton and she learned from Mickey Rooney.
Wow.
So Mickey passed on through a lot of people consider Mickey one of the great talents, not only because he was a great actor, but he was a singer, a dancer. He could play every instrument. He was literate. He wrote books. So kind of a Renaissance man in a certain way.
Yes. Now, we're going to take a short break for a moment, and I'm talking to Richard Lertzman, and he wrote the definitive biography on the iconic actor Mickey Rooney.
Cool off with the delicious treat at FYI Frozen Yogurt and Ice Cream Shop in beautiful Delray Beach, Florida. FYI offers more than 20 flavors of ice cream, frozen yogurt, Italian gelato, sorbet, protein shakes, and more. FYI also caters birthday parties or any special occasion. Enjoy these wonderful treats in our cool, breezy, kid-friendly cafe. That looks good. Can Mommy have a taste? Oh well. You can receive a free small cone of frozen yogurt or ice cream if you say the magic word, Susan sent you. Don't forget to pick up a coupon for $1 off your next purchase. They're located at 9 Northeast 2nd Avenue in Pineapple Grove, Delray Beach, Florida. They're open 7 days a week. For store hours or more information, call 561-450-7402. This commercial brought to you by FYI Frozen Yogurt and Ice Cream Shop and the Susan Brender Show. See you there.
Okay, we're back with Richard Lertzman, who's a man who, when you talk about various things about your jobs and what you've done with your life, tell me a little bit about your previous occupations.
Well, my love was always film, so after I graduated from college, I went for a master's in film at USC in Los Angeles. And so I loved film, but I went back into business, and I spent much of my life as a business. I reorganized businesses that went out of business, and eventually I founded the casinos in Ohio because I thought it would bring a lot of jobs, and which it did, and a lot of industry to Ohio. So I did that, but my love was always film, so I went back to film writing back in the early 2000s, and I've written books on comedy teams. In fact, one book on the Three Stooges. I have a book that came out in 2013 with my co-author, William J. Birnes, and that is Dr. Feelgood. And that told about a man named Dr. Max Jacobson who he injected the drug methamphetamine into some of the greatest people of the 20th century, including John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe. And I started that book. I started that because I wrote a book on an actor named Robert Cummings. And Bob Cummings was this beloved film star and a television star for many of us back in the 50s.
Father Knows Best, correct?
Love that Bob, the Bob Cummings Show. And so when Bob Cummings was known as a man who wrote a book called How to Stay Young and Vital. And so he was a health fanatic. And so as I did research and got to know his family, I was friends with a gentleman named Dwayne Hickman who did a show called The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. And Dwayne was a co-star on Love That Bob. He played his nephew Chuck. And Dwayne said, Bob was... I went with Bob to Dr. Feelgood in New York. I said, Dr. Feelgood, Bob Cummings? He said, we went there, and there was a man, and he came out, and I was in a lobby, and there was Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams and Anthony Quinn, and Bob Cummings went in, and he got this shot from this doctor. I said, what was his name? He goes, Dr. Max Jacobson. Well, Max Jacobson, I knew from knowing Kennedy that he was called Dr. Feelgood. And when I told this to my agent, he said, the book you should write is on Dr. Feelgood. So I spent 5 years researching that book, and it was interesting. I got to talk to great people like Gore Vidal, and I met Andy Williams. I flew down to Berkeley, California, and met Eddie Fisher, who was one of Dr. Jacobson's patients, and Debbie Reynolds. So it was a great, the fun of doing a book like Dr. Feelgood or Mickey Rooney is in the research, because you get to talk to so many of the wonderful icons that we watch and read and admire.
Well, you've had quite a career, but now let's get into something a little bit different about you. So, name some of your favorite composers or music artists.
I love the standards. So I love Gershwin. And I love, people who wrote many of the classics from. I love, you got me. I'm
Never
trying
mind.
to grab up names from the great standards, but I love all the standards, the Sinatras, and Andy Williams, and people who sang, a lot of the classic ballads. Kind of, and then I love classical music as well, Tchaikovsky and some great composers.
Well, now let's talk a little bit more about Richard. Richard, if you could meet any historical character, who would it be, and what would you say to him or her?
A historical character, probably, one person I'd like to meet now is Louis B. Mayer, who is the head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. And there's so many questions I'd have to ask him about, how he ran that studio, and what he did to run that studio. Which, when I did the research for the Mickey Rooney book, I discovered so many dark and mysterious things about that studio, and I'd love to learn more. I
can imagine. Now, also, what is your favorite occupation when you're not writing?
My favorite occupation is cooking with my wife.
Ah.
So when I'm not writing, my wife teaches me, and she's a great cook, and she teaches me how to do a lot of exotic recipes that she knows.
So while you're having this writing experience of writing some of the most wonderful books, you also love and have a life outside of what you do, and you love cooking. So how did that happen?
More for my wife, that she was a great cook, and I love to watch the Food Network or the Cooking Channel, and I just wanted to learn how to do something like that, and she helped me explore that. So it's kind of a fun side, and it's kind of an interesting hobby.
Mm-hmm. And what's your fantasy profession as well?
My fantasy profession would be to be a filmmaker, to be a director. I studied to do that, but it's such a very difficult thing.
Well, it may be difficult, but you've been so successful with your books. It seems to me that directing should be pretty easy.
But it's an interesting occupation, and I got a chance to interview a lot of the great directors like George Cukor and Frank Capra and Jules White, and I just always admired their talent as an auteur, and to be able to control the tempo and movement of a film.
So, Richard, if you were to give some advice to the young people, those who want to be in the film industry, those who want to write a book, what would you tell them?
Try to learn from the best of the best. Try to learn in schools and read as many books as possible. And then once you decide what you want to do in writing, you just got to persevere. You got to just keep pushing forward, and keep moving forward.
And if they do that, how do they get started?
Well, it's a kind of a catch-22, because there's a lot of people who can be great writers, college professors, and it's a very difficult profession. You got to break through with your first book, and to do that, you have to have an agent, and so you just got to keep persevering, sending your work to agents. A lot of publishing companies don't accept work unless you have an agent representing you. So you try to get to know the agents and try to keep showing them your work and trying to push forward.
Yeah, and also tell our audience what your favorite songs are as well.
My favorite songs are a lot of the standards like Young at Heart. I love George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. I love a lot of the standards.
Is there any book that you love to reread? Because you seemingly are a very prolific reader. You do so much reading, I'm sure. So, what book would you love to reread? I
read, there's a great book that Mark Twain wrote, his own autobiography, and it's been annotated, and it's a fairly complex book, and I just love to reread and read the book and read the thoughts of Mark Twain.
And do you have one sentence of advice for new writers?
My advice would be to persevere.
Persevere. Yeah. But can young people make any money out of this career? Is it possible in this day and age?
Well, hopefully. I do make a living as a writer, so there is, and there's so many possibilities today in writing. It's even more than any other generation, because there's so much of influence in media, and there's so many different aspects from writing, even a blog on the internet, and there's so many opportunities to ply your craft as a writer. So, absolutely, it's a career that you can earn a living at.
And the next thing that you are going to get involved in, is that also part of your writing? Are you going to write a new book?
I'm writing a new book on the life of Stanley Kramer, who is one of our great filmmakers, from High Noon to The Caine Mutiny to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. His wife, Karen Kramer, is assisting us on the book, so we're going to explore how he made socially conscious films and helped change America. And I'm also doing a TV series that will premiere in January on the Reels channel, and it's based on the Dr. Feelgood book. And hopefully it looks like we're going to have a a miniseries from Mickey Rooney that will be on HBO in 2016.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, you're going to have such an amazing experience. You are doing so very many projects, and writing and producing a miniseries. How do you manage that?
Well, it's exciting. You just want to explore as many avenues, and it's fascinating to work. We are. I'll be in Los Angeles in 3 weeks, and we'll be shooting the Dr. Feelgood miniseries. So that's going to be fun, and watching the process is interesting. And both my writing partner, Bill Birnes, and myself are contributing to that series.
You just mentioned the word process. Tell us about the process.
Well, there's a lot of when you write, you want to have a discipline. You wake up every morning and you just make sure you can do so many pages each day. You want to do so much research. So it's a process that you have to do. When you complete a book like Mickey Rooney, you want to be as thorough as possible, truthful as possible. You want to check every source, and you want to make sure that what you've put out there is correct. The Mickey Rooney was such a great star for so many years, and there were actually no biographies written about him. There was one by Arthur Marks back in the late 70s, and Mickey wrote a couple autobiographies, but Mickey Rooney's autobiographies are more kind of fictional. A lot of, some fact, but a lot of stories that Mickey had made up. And when someone's an historical figure, I think you got to create a historical work about his life. And after 400 films and television shows and everything else that he did, stage shows like Sugar Babies, I think it's he's an historical figure that is due something that is an empirical work.
So if people want to get in touch with you and buy the Mickey Rooney book, what do they have to do?
Well, they could go to we have a Facebook page that they can order the book from, and it's facebook.com/Mickey Rooney Bio, and they could take a look. And every day we have new pieces of information about Mickey, and that they can also go to SimonandSchuster.com, and the book is listed there, or go to Amazon.com. In fact, our book comes out on October 20th, and right now it's on a pre-sale, and it lists at $30 and on Amazon, and I don't set the prices. Simon & Schuster does that, but it's at $15.38. So for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, they can buy it at almost 50% off the list price.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's been absolutely a pleasure to interview you, Richard A. Lertzman. You are quite a guest.
Well, Susan, I really appreciate the opportunity, and your questions are just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show.